Welcome to the 500th episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Thank you for listening. A couple of you may have listened to all 500 episodes. Have to do some shout-outs today. I'll start with Lee Dahl, who is a friend that drugged me into Ironman racing and has listened to a lot of the podcasts. We don't live in the same town a lot of the time now, so she keeps up with what I'm doing by listening to the podcast. And she actually gave me a bottle of champagne and a flower and a card that says, "That's a lot of talking." And it certainly is. And my computer, when I logged on tonight, proved it by saying I had too many audio tracks and I had to delete some before I could get this podcast out. So thank you, Apple and Lee, for pointing all the talking I have done out. I'd also like to give a shout out to Erica Salerno, a longtime listener, now a runner and plant-based eater. And I think we had something to do with some of those things. She is on a health journey and is doing excellent and increasing her running, and very, very proud of her. She's actually a member of the practice. I'd also like to give a shout out to Lois Shield. She's a member of the practice and listens and says I'm in her ear and keeps her from doing bad things when she's thinking about getting into some bad food. Another shout out to Charles Culp, a longtime listener. He gives me a lot of great feedback. I appreciate that. Becky Swearington, a runner. Quote from Becky, "I don't think you'll mind, but she didn't think she'd ever achieve her goals." And I said, "You better get ready because you're achieving her goals." And not only has she achieved her weight loss goals, but she's also a runner now. Janet Keener, a new runner and plant-based eater, doing well, adding strength training to her wellness program. Darren Blakesley, thank you for the kind words. Margaret Popolek. Margaret wrote in and said she is also a runner. She has remained cancer-free since her diagnosis and taking up a plant-based whole foods lifestyle. So another success story, one right after the other, I might say. Ingrid Mordusi, she's been listening for a long time. I think she may have even come to a conference. And she likes the podcast, both when I ramble about my races and nutrition. But she complimented me in a nice way and said she liked how I was no nonsense talking about things, translated blunt and to the point. But thank you very much for liking that style. It's kind of the only style I have, unfortunately. My nurse sometimes tells me, now you need to tone it down a little bit before you go in the room, but not often. Thank you for listening, Laura Hoffman, as well as Amanda Locatus, and wouldn't be right without a shout out to Timmerie Hagenberger, a registered dietitian that has been a speaker at my conference, who I've had on the podcast, and she's actually saved me from some things that we shouldn't have recorded on the podcast and didn't do my editing correctly a couple times. So thank you all for your emails. I do appreciate it. It's kind of hard that I've been doing this for a long time. I told somebody today I try to put out a podcast every week to maintain content, but also not to forget how I need to put out a podcast because there's several steps. I do my own editing, so sometimes you hear the dog bark or something slam, or the sound may not just be quite right. But I do my research and I record the podcast and I edit it and get it up while trying to keep a full-time job going on. So it's not always perfect, but it's me, and that's pretty much how I live my life. So thank you for putting up with me. Over the years, I started the podcast out, if anybody remembers, interviewing people. And I had a legal pad with names of guests that I'd like to interview, and I put them down and I call them. I'd be so shocked that they said they would like to be on the podcast or would agree to be on the podcast. And I've learned a lot and had some very interesting guests, and people have been very kind, and I appreciate all the guests that have been on my podcast in the past. But I've kind of evolved over the years, for the most part, to just trying to bring some science to life and maybe share how I think medicine should be practiced. I think as many people can relate, once you become plant-based and you kind of start seeing the flaws in the allopathic medicine, so to speak. Things have changed over my career since graduating from medical school in 1987. The beauty of medicine that I liked the most was learning the physiology and anatomy of humans and health and disease, and trying to figure out the puzzle when somebody came in with symptoms. And I am very grateful for my training at West Virginia University. I think I got a really good training as far as physical diagnosis, and my knowledge base was good. Went to University of Pittsburgh for my residency and fellowship, and honed that in. And I've been around a lot of people over the years that have taught me a lot of things, and I feel like I've soaked it up. But one of the things that I like most is talking to people and learning what they're about. I might not have remembered everybody's name over the years, but if you can, I can tell you their story. And I can tell you their story from where I met them, maybe what room they were in the hospital, maybe even what they were wearing at the time. I always pride myself in knowing people, their families, what they like and their dislikes. And that has given me a tremendous amount of joy over the years, getting to know people and people sharing their lives with me. And this podcast is a lot like that, because I share my life with the people that listen to the podcast. And I'm a listener of podcasts too, and you kind of feel like you get to know somebody. And you get to know them maybe a little too good without ever having met them for the most part. But I think that's important to create relationships and to convey a sense of honesty and genuine interest in people. My mom used to say, "What are you going to talk about tonight on the podcast?" And I knew that if I started talking about what paper I was going to present or what science I was going to talk, she would just kind of roll her eyes and be bored, because we didn't share that love of science together by any chance. But what she did like was a story, and I liked a story, and being able to present a podcast in a form that kind of ties a story together. It resonated with her, and something that I've always tried to do is to kind of tell the story of what I'm thinking about for the week, and the stories and the people that I've seen in the week in the office, and what's bothered me perhaps, and insights that I may have gained, because as much as I try to educate people, people educate me. And I'm always learning, and I'm learning from other people and observing. And I never get tired of that. I never get tired of learning from other people and observing humans. And I try to be human myself, for that matter. And I appreciate the honesty that people have shown to me over the years. Spoiler alert, if it sounds like I'm retiring, I'm not. Certainly not retiring from the podcast. This is not the last episode. I have no way to tie it all together, so not to worry. I'd probably like to say, and we'll discuss later maybe, that I want to actually expand it a little bit. Because I like having conversations with people, I'd like to expand that with the podcast community, and perhaps maybe once a month have a live podcast session where people could give me a question or two and we could have a conversation. I think that might be good. So if you're in for that, hang on, send me an email, and look for more things to come. But I'm not going to give up the regular podcast either. I wasn't sure when I started talking about race reports and my different running adventures whether people would have any interest in that. I actually have had a good bit of feedback saying people do enjoy, if nothing else, my stories of trials and tribulations and what went wrong and perhaps what went right. And mostly I try to convey those stories because I want people to know that a regular is a friend of mine who I think I had on the podcast, a regular nobody, could do if they just put their mind to it. I didn't grow up an athlete. I was in the band. I golfed. Wasn't necessarily a Certainly wasn't a cardiovascular sport, but I enjoyed the outdoors, and one thing led to another. But I recognized from an early stage in my career that physical fitness and physical activity were keys to maintaining health. And when I first started my practice, I talked more about physical fitness than I did nutrition. Nutrition was pretty much, you should eat healthy, maybe read this book about Dean Ornish, and I went on my merry way. But I wanted everybody to exercise. And so when I first started running marathons, I had the great idea of framing my marathon shirt and the finisher medal, and I put them up in the office. And it didn't really spur anybody to run back in the day. It started a conversation occasionally, but it didn't spur anybody to becoming more active. But through the podcast, it kind of has, as far as sharing the running experiences. And I always said that if I could take my practice patients and show them the people that I meet in the running community, and they saw how positive that community was, that they would be more active and take up a similar type activity. Because I think people don't realize or don't think that I'm too old to run, your knees will hurt, I've tried to run before, I've tried to be active before, things didn't work. And they don't realize that, if you go to a marathon, you see people of all size and shape and age having fun, and people on the sidelines of all sizes and shapes clapping and cheering for those people, and this genuine, positive, cheering for fellow humankind. And it's like, what a better world this would be if more people could experience that. And so that's one of the reasons why I share my running trials and tribulations, to kind of maybe show people that they can write their own story. It doesn't have to be, I'm 60 years old and I should just, hang up the towel and sit around and, wait for the end, so to speak, because I can't do anything. I don't believe that it's ever too late as long as you're taking a breath. And I want to convey that through the podcast. I think when I look at medicine over the years, and maybe I look at society and people that I've taken care of over the years, and maybe it's because I'm getting older, I see there's a point where people feel there's no comeback. They're too far gone, perhaps, too far overweight, too sick, too out of shape, and there's no coming back from it. And I want to convey that that's not the case at all. I think if you were, if we look at life in general, our health gradually declines until we die, but it's certainly not, and it doesn't have to be in a straight line from perfect health as a child to terrible health, a straight line down as we age. There are peaks and valleys. And I talked with my running coach briefly about this week, about running an ultra marathon, and that, you're running along and you hit about mile 30 and all of a sudden you don't feel very good. The gels don't taste good. Your legs start to really hurt, or more things start to come up, and he's like, oh no, one of the big thing is, oh no, are the wheels falling off, so to speak. And you had a choice at that point. You're at a crossroads. Can you troubleshoot and get out of the funk, or do you continue to tell yourself, oh, this is getting bad, and support that story and continue to decline and maybe quit? And the reality of it is things don't really get much worse. They get better. So maybe taking a gel, having some nutrition, maybe slowing down, you start to feel better, and you actually come out of it and you feel good for a while. And then as the race goes on, you start to feel poorly again, and it's kind of cycles. And as long as you can keep your troubleshooting and keep looking at things and what can I do to turn this around, things are never just low. There are highs and lows, and eventually you can finish. But if you look at this is bad and it's going to continue to get bad, typically it does, and you start to give all kinds of reasons why it's bad and why perhaps you shouldn't continue. Sometimes you can deteriorate for long enough and have your pity party and then decide where you're going to come out of it. But you've waited so long before you troubleshoot that you got to claw your way back up, and it's a little bit harder because to get to feeling better is a little bit more distance because you let yourself feel so bad. But it takes a little longer, but it doesn't mean you can't turn it around. It just means it requires a little bit more effort. And perhaps there's somebody on your crew that, gives you a spark of fresh air, or you see something and, whatever, more nutrition, and you turn things around. And I think it's a lot like health and life in general, that, things seem bad, but they don't stay bad. They get better. But you can tell a story that they were bad, they've always been bad, and they're going to be bad, or you can see what you've learned from things that have happened. There are many people that talk about, even having cancer, having been one of the best things that possibly could have happened to them, because it was a giant wake-up call. It was a giant wake-up call to change their lifestyle, to start enjoying life at the moment, and start doing things, and they actually became healthier on the other side of it. Most people wouldn't think that, but it can happen. Same way with heart disease or any other disease, or even being overweight. It's never too late to turn it around. There's always somebody out there. There's a story out there of somebody that's done it, but we don't see it because we're not in that frame of mind. It's kind of like if you get a new red car, all of a sudden you notice everybody's driving a red car, but when you were driving a white car, you never saw there was a red car. And so we see what supports our story more than the potential possibilities. And again, another long way of saying that's what this podcast is about is, we can troubleshoot what's going on. It's not necessarily easy, and it's not just about eating more blueberries, but there's mindsets that we can do along with nutrition and movement that can make people's quality of life much, much better. If I had to pick a favorite guest of the podcast over these 500 episodes, it'll be Addie Dulaney Meinerich. Yes, I'm a proud mother. But we usually do the podcast. Well, we've done a few when we're in the same room, and we've done a few on Zoom, but we always laugh because it seems funny to do the introduction staring at each other. But it's always a good conversation. I like listening to her because I see a very honest, genuine, caring person, that really wants to help people. When she was young, trying to figure out what she wanted to be, most of my friends were in the healthcare profession, and she didn't really have a lot of ideas about what else you could do. But she always knew that she wanted to help someone. And she has a very different style than I do, so it makes practicing with her in our practice very good, because she is very energetic, positive, creative, and as Ingrid said, I can be very blunt and to the point. So it's nice to hear that fresh air that she brings to an interview, and her positivity and creativity, and how I can tell she really found her niche when she went into dietetics, and she walks the walk, and that makes me proud. So say what you want. I'm proud mama moment. But that was my favorite guest, or she is my favorite guest, I should say. She'll be on more as well. So as always, what's going on and what's new for me? In 2 weeks, we're going to run a 50K, not that far, on the west coast of Florida on trail. And then the hope is to go back to Long Haul 100. I am excited to have the race director for the Long Haul 100 on the podcast next week. He is, I believe, 62 years old and just completed a 200-mile ultra event running across Florida. So I think that's going to be very exciting to listen to. I hate to say this, but he's kind of sparked a little interest in something I never thought I would want to do. So don't tell anybody, but it's crossed my mind. Our fruit trees are dormant. Hopefully with the little cold weather we're having, some of the mango trees will start to bloom. We have some sapotas on the vine. Hopefully they won't get frozen. But Other than that, my raised beds are gone because I'm doing a construction project in my backyard, so those have to be kind of put together as the tower gardens. So I'm left with sprouts in my dish drainer and baking sourdough bread every week. So those are my projects, nutritional projects that I have going on right now. It wouldn't be a podcast without talking a little bit about research. And there was a RAND study that was very encompassing, that looked at U.S. population. And RAND is a large research group that's independent and not sponsored or anything else. But they wanted to try to find the predictive power or research or the risk factors associated with dementia and cognitive impairment. So not necessarily a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, but dementia, all-encompassing, so to speak. And they looked at a variety of different risk factors, demographics, socioeconomics, labor, exercise, smoking, genes, psychosocial personality traits, activities, kindness. And they looked at people 2 years, 4 years, and then 20 years after age 60. So they were looking at people, did they develop dementia at 80, and what was the risk factors of all those things that they looked at. And they came up with some of the strongest predictors. And some are maybe obvious and some aren't. One is baseline cognitive ability. So your baseline ability to think and do things. It doesn't mean book smart. It can be, mechanic smart, craft smart, whatever. But your cognitive ability at 60 was very predictive of what would happen to you by 80. Your overall health in general. So if you have poor health, which may be associated with poor blood flow or poor immune system, so to speak, that was a predictor. And then functional limitations. If you are at 60, having trouble getting around, taking care of yourself, then obviously that's a big risk factor for dementia. What wasn't very predictive was your parental health, so how your parents' health was, your family size, whether you were married or not, where you lived, were the weakest things associated with dementia. Things that were associated, poor physical health, if you'd had a stroke, lower cognitive ability, functional limitations, and genetics predicted future decline in cognitive ability, which would be associated with future dementia. People that lived in the southern United States had a higher incidence of developing cognitive impairment and dementia, even when controlled for some other socioeconomic factors. Not having private health insurance at age 60, never having worked at all or only worked for a few years in the workforce, having diabetes, a body mass index of greater than 35, at age 60 were also associated with the cognitive decline and dementia. Never drinking alcohol or drinking excessively was associated with dementia, but not moderate alcohol intake. Never exercising, scoring low on physical tests such as grip strength, breathing tests, strength tests, walking speed, and balance were associated with a risk of cognitive decline and dementia. Being less conscientious, decreased engagement in hobbies or learning new things, also associated with a risk of developing dementia. Blacks and Hispanic had higher risk of dementia and cognitive impairment, but if you took socioeconomic status into account, that played lesser of a role. For my interpretation, I would think living in the South is associated with the food that we see down here. Fried Southern comfort food has, obviously not very healthy. The amount of people that are overweight is greater in the South, usually, than in the North. It's weird that people, we have better weather down here, but, again, there's always a reason not to move, right? But I think the study goes back to what I've talked to you about all night, is that people come at a crossroads, and I see the crossroads at about age 60. And maybe I see it because I am age 60 and looking at the crossroads, and I see everybody that's 60, and it's like, are they at crossroads? And am I at a crossroads? And I think it's probably true that at this age, it becomes a new chapter in people's lives. And it could be a chapter of retirement. It could be a chapter of social isolation, perhaps, or it could be a chapter of, we're living life to the fullest, but we're not exercising and moving around and putting on 10 or 15 pounds and accumulating lifestyle diseases. And I think that's what sneaks up on people, if I had to guess. And well, I'm not really guessing, I'm observing. You can look at your friends, your high school reunion, that weight gain tends to be greatest in that area of, say, 45 to 55. You see people start to put on weight, and perhaps they're doing less, eating more. The caloric density of food is increased, and people start to accumulate, different diagnoses: high cholesterol, little high blood pressure, put you on the med for this, put you on the med for that. Maybe your knees hurt a little bit, so you're not going to walk as much, and on and on and on. And you can see the slippery slope that starts to occur. If you look around, depending on the company that you keep, you may see a similar thing. And so again, like the red cars, you see it everywhere around you, so it must be normal because it's happening to everybody. But it doesn't happen to everybody. And I think that's what is not shown as much. There is no safety net in having annual checks and screenings and doctors following and CTs and all these things. That's not going to change things. The only thing that's going to change is a change in activity and a change in nutrition. And it's up to us that are plant-based to stay fast and show people this is the way. To exercise at any age, to have a passion for your hobby at any age, this is the way. But it's not getting in a fast food line and being happy that you don't have to cook and just doing takeout. It's continuing to do hard things. I've seen people in my neighborhood selling the properties because they can't take care of them anymore, and watching one hurricane after another was just too much. This past year, and it was too much on people to try to carry boxes, to try to carry furniture. You have to be in shape to do those things. You have to be mentally in shape to be able to handle discomfort and to handle hard times. I think society tells us to press the easy button, to take it easy, don't exercise, do this hack, take this medicine. Somebody else will fix it if we get broken. Don't do things yourself. Don't strain too much. Stress is bad. And we start to accept it and run the other way and perhaps medicate our way into not feeling any of it. I talked to somebody this week in the office, and their life is very stressful. Most people's lives are very stressful, but they have a particularly stressful life, and it's always been stressful. It probably won't change significantly, but how you look at the stress can change. What do you see it as, a burden or an opportunity? How do you work around it? How do you work with stress? Because we have the choice to react when things happen to us. We get a moment when that at first, you get that initial jolt, but then you have a moment to decide which way you want to go. Do you want to troubleshoot and get back up and continue on? Or do you want to continue the slide and ignore things and slide more? Part of doing hard physical challenges is that you learn to troubleshoot in perhaps a controlled environment. When I'm running, things hurt. I think most people that run, things hurt. If you're young and you're running, you run as hard till things hurt. If you're older, you run and maybe things hurt just because bones and joints are a little bit older, and muscles and tendons are a little bit creakier and they hurt. But there are moments of joy. It doesn't hurt all the time, and we have the ability to, when doing something like that, control how much discomfort we can take. But there is discomfort, and afterwards, there's a benefit. So there is a satisfaction, decrease inflammation. There's a health benefit afterwards, but the hard thing had to be done, but it can be done in a controlled environment. Sometimes things happen to us in life that we don't really have any control. But if you practice doing hard things in a controlled environment, it might just be a little bit easier to troubleshoot when things come out of nowhere and hit you when you have to troubleshoot. The holidays can be tough for a lot of people. People can remember how things were, the good memories, perhaps people that they miss. But there's also a lot of joy in the holidays. And everybody says, when you see a child and the wonderment of a child and the excitement of children with the holiday season, it brings joy to everyone. But if we look at children in their how they look at everything, they see amazement and wonder and joy and very simple things around us. And the question is, when do we lose that ability to look at something very simple and not find joy in it? Some people never do. Some people do at a very early age. And maybe that leads to us to do other things to try to find joy or have that sense of purpose. And we go looking. Some people go looking far, travel, cruises, looking for that joy or that amazement. And I think that's all good, because I think as long as people keep looking, it's great. I think we have to remember it's also right under our nose, and to be able to look day to day on the mundane things of the good things that are around us is also very helpful. But I also think that just getting outside in any way, shape, or form lets that come true or not. And I think the reason why we're all driven to look for those things and to go out and travel and do things and run and camp and all those things is that we are looking for a reconnection with nature and a reconnection with a joy and a beauty that we see that you can't find inside. You can't find it in a TV show. And so I would encourage you to look around, get outside, even if it's cold, and enjoy Christmas lights, other people, and to do some hard things in this upcoming year and next year so that you too can experience that sense of satisfaction that you're still able to troubleshoot. This podcast, if you don't know what it's about, is about being thankful for you all listening over the years, and grateful that you'll tune in, perhaps even share it with a friend. That this old lady that's been talking for 500 episodes that says a few good things that you can relate to. So share it with your friends if you so choose. Again, I think I'm toying with the idea of going with an additional platform that we do a Q&A once a month, probably on this setting, a live podcast type scenario. If you would like to learn more about our practice or like us to help you, whether it's registered dietitian, consultation, strength training, medical advice, all of the above, a little bit of the above, or just search our private website content, please go over to the website at drdulaney.com, DoctorDulaney. Thank you again for the emails that you sent me. You can always email me at Jami, Jami, at drdulaney.com. I'd love to hear from you. There's a link to a little ebook with recipes that are helpful over the holidays. But again, our members-only website has a ton of holiday recipes as well as traditional recipes that can get your plant-based knowledge up and running, and you can be very comfortable in this lifestyle. We'd love to help you. Thank you as always for listening, and I'll be back next week with good old boy Andy Kroom Matthews.